when I think about the prominence of ESG today, again, as somebody once told me, ESG doesn't stand for environmental, social, and governance. It stands for every single group. Because truly, when you think about the impact that ESG has across the organization, it really touches every single area, from finance to sales to legal to sustainability, operations, if you're manufacturing the production line. So really, when we think about it, everybody's responsible for ESG. And a lot of times we think, hey, gosh, it's got to fall into the sustainability team's bucket or just legal. But really, it impacts it from not only internally, but also externally. So, Danny, I'm just thinking that, a lot of these things, I know you've seen a lot of these examples. Can you give us an example just recently that you've seen how prominent it is within the market today?
Yeah, no, for sure. Look, it's something that's the growth rate of the regulatory space around all of ESG is something that's taken, well, I guess not everyone by surprise, just given the amount of press that it's taken. But what has taken people by surprise is the level of enforcement. So the deadlines that you would traditionally associate with regulations that come into force, there can be lobbying and there can be appeals made for extending deadlines, but that's not happening in the case with enforcements that's taking place or any company reporting. There was a metric shared recently where back in 2021, there were 23 regulations that companies had to report on from an ESG reporting perspective. In 2023, that moved from the 23 to 150. So it's growing at a rate where companies are almost, it's creeping up. Even though there's been so much publicity, it's creeping up in terms of, I've got to do something for January 2024. And then we're in trouble, right? Because it's too late to try and get the house in order, as it were. So one of the questions that's arising out of that is, where does responsibility lie? So we're seeing it across, just as you said, different departments, right? So in some cases, it sits within the legal team, general counsels. In some circumstances, given the level of financial reporting, it's in the office of the CFO. There is a level of vagueness there in terms of where responsibility lies. So the most successful programs that I've seen is where there is a kind of a team brought together that merge both the overlap, both from a product compliance, ESG compliance, and other sources as well, in terms of how do you grasp the nettle here of what needs to be done by, let's say, January 2024.
And I think, we're seeing that paradigm shift from, hey, we're consuming these regulations, but everything is changing so fast and so rapid, right? So when we think about the biggest question I get is, how do I know that what I'm doing today is going to be commensurate with really what the market's demanding? And then almost thinking forward from there. So as we think about how fast these regulations are changing, I know Danny's going to provide a few stats here in a minute, but what we find is that, again, there's a discomfort sometimes of how fast are we tracking these regulations? And again, are we comprehensive? Because as a lot of organizations are going global and they're challenged with, hey, we need to know what's going to be important as we go into either these new markets, as we dive into, new areas, and we even grow our business from an employee footprint, because it's not just the business, the external business, but it's also the internal business side. And Danny, I don't know if you can give an example, but there's a lot of numbers out there, and I think sometimes it's eye-opening just to see, but maybe you want to share a few numbers just around how fast those regulations are changing.
Yeah, no, sure, Ken. I've actually got something here I'm just going to throw up on screen to help exemplify that. Traditionally, we've seen a linear growth of regulations. So here's some data around something related to packaging, right? So we've seen this over the years, year on year growth of regulations. We expect to see this linear growth, and that is forecast to continue. But when we move into the ESG space, we see the graph almost exponential. So when we look at 2024 pending here, this is actually 6 months of data into the year, so we expect this to go exponential as the year closes out. So the rate of change and newly introduced regulations continues at that pace, which is kind of scary. Just as you say, you think you've got everything together and you're just about to go live, and you suddenly find out one of the regulations has changed, right? So we were publishing a newsletter back in May. We started out publishing, here are the top 5 or 6 key core changes that you need to be on top of. That morphed into 15 in June, July. We stopped doing the top 10, 15 because there's so much change. In July, would you believe there were 171 changes to ESG related regulations or newly introduced? In August, that moved to 162, and we're now in September as we're chatting here. It's the 10th of September, and it's already at 91. So
Right.
crazy amount of change, and that is set to continue.